did you guys, isn't that keynote thing interesting? I've been thinking about management time and attention, and I know I'm not going to flip my entire presentation, but it's just so important, and that's why I keep going back to TOC is such a key thing of what we do. It's simplicity. It's hard to be simple. It's really hard to think about, for me, what's the limiting factor, the value we're trying to offer, where should I spend my time and attention. It's an ongoing struggle, but it's worth one pursuing. And I think Rami did a great job summing up some of the essence of TOC, simplicity. Okay, this breakout is all about doing a review of the 7 fundamentals of a high-performing organization, which is embedded in our success framework. We've talked about success. You may have heard the logo, but we haven't done really a good job ever defining it or putting it all in one place. So we put together this little brochure that you guys all have. And then I'm going to talk through it. Now, we could spend days on this, right? Each one of these fundamentals is a kind of a practice and discipline unto itself. But today, I just want to do a high-level overview so you can understand how the different pieces correlate and connect, why they're important, some of the challenges we see within these different fundamentals, and how we can overcome them. Does that sound good? And I have some candy for those who help me with an exercise. So there you go. So let me do a little overview first of the fundamentals, and then I'll go into each one a little deeper. Success is an acronym, and it starts with set your goals and targets, and you heard Rami talk about it today, quoting his father, Dr. Eli Goldratt, that productivity really doesn't matter if you don't understand your goal. We've talked about goal units today, and that clarity just should drive everything. It should be the filter of everything we do. So first, setting goals and targets. If we don't have that set up, everything else we do becomes very distorted. Once we have clarity on our goal, we use data analysis and thinking tools. Actually, in the world of TOC, thinking tools is, I just didn't make that up. It's actually what they call a lot of their tools for thinking. How do you break conflicts? There's a thinking tool called a conflict cloud. How do you look at real root causes? There's some tools that are a little more, use them at the appropriate time because they can be a little, I hate to use the word, they're time intensive. They're called current reality trees, for example. So there's lots of different things you can do to understand your core conflicts and use thinking tools. We've tried to simplify a lot of this, and you heard him talk, a lot of the TOC principles have been done in the business environment, some in government, and a lot of our work has been to translate these into environments that can work in government and that sometimes are easier just to pick up, use, and apply so that we can scale them. But it's a lot about using your analysis and building out your operations in a way that makes sense. After you've done use your thinking tools, then you create strategy. Why is it important to create strategy after you've done a review of your processes and understand where your gaps are? It sounds like an obvious question, right? But why is that even important? Because I mentioned this earlier today. Have any of you, and I've done this, been in a room and the way you create strategy is just kind of like sitting around a table and talking ideas? Has anyone ever done that? Yeah. And you talk about these interesting ideas and you get these strategies and they sound great, and then you do all this cool marketing material around it. But it has nothing to do with actually the flow of your work or the processes that are really in play. And then you end up overlaying strategies to a system that's already kind of not working very well. So you actually create more chaos in your system. Remember, Rami talked today about change, what to change to, and how to cause the change. We really, before we introduce changes into our system, we want to understand what's currently going on so that we don't introduce unnecessary changes and that we introduce changes that actually make a difference. That's why we do strategy third. Fourth is then we create our organization. I'll talk a little bit about that, right? Sometimes the first thing we do in government is we go and reorganize, right? But if you already have a solid process and a set of disciplines and practices and you just move it, that doesn't really help anything. There's a time and place for that. I've certainly reorganized things in my own life, different places I've worked, but we want to make sure it's aligned with the strategy. And then we talk about engaging employees and customers. This is an iterative process, right? You don't just do that once, but I'll talk about some lessons learned I've had through going through that. And then the final 2 S's are synchronizing your projects and your policies. Really, I'm going to spend time today talking about IT projects specifically. Again, we used to call these things the fatal 4. I think that's kind of extreme. I call them the false 4. It's the things we easily go after in government to try to fix because they're the easiest to see sometimes. So we go after automation, training people, more money, or reorganization. We call those the false fours because if we go after those first, we're going to miss some of those core conflicts and just treat symptoms. So with IT, I want to talk a little bit about the timing of IT and how do you create structures and governance structures to make sure that those are flowing correctly. And finally, the last S is stays focused. And you heard about that today, management time and attention. If we identify the big gaps in our systems and we know what our strategies and our key leverage points are, how much time are we really spending on those? Stacy sent me some research a few weeks ago that said that organizations usually, and these are good performing organizations, the management, they're lucky if they're spending 49% of their time on the critical goals of the organization. Does that seem true to you or surprising? Like, that even seems kind of high to me. That assumes that we know what the key goals are and the strategies and lever points are. But if we understand what those are we spending the right amount of time on those? Constant challenge, I think. All right, so now that we know the flow of what success means, I'm going to go through the highlights and some of the challenges I've had. Oh, bam, there you go. Some of the challenges I've actually had and lessons learned through my own experiences. Let's start with S. Let's start with setting our goals. You've heard a lot about this today, goal units and clarity on goal. There's three things I've seen have challenge with in a lot of organizations I've been around. One, either there is no goal, right? There's just no clarity on the goal. Two, if there is a goal, they don't have alignment with the operation. So we say some really cool goal. Have you ever heard WIGs, wildly important goals, a really great goal, but then like it doesn't really happen in operations. We don't really see the translation happening. And a lot of times that happens, or there's no alignment. And even if we wanted there to be alignment, we don't have the data to make sure that there's alignment between it. So let me give you an example. So when I stepped into workforce services, I don't know, maybe like 9 years ago, Workforce Services does a lot of different programs, and one of those programs is eligibility, and that's going through the process to see if people are eligible for public assistance benefits, everything from Medicaid and food stamps, yada, yada. So we go in there, and we have a call center, and I'm listening to employees and customers, and there's just a lot of buzz around call center, right? Lots of issues around call centers. So we have lots of data on call centers. Oh my gosh, we could tell you drop calls and time wait times and why people were calling and how long they're on the call. And now the whole thing in the United States has moved from call centers to contact centers because that sounds cool. And it was great. We had all this great data about call centers. But what we didn't have is clarity on what our throughput was and our actual goal units. When we started to clarify that, I'm going to ask you guys is an eligibility services organization, was our goal or goal unit to be a great call center? It wasn't, right? What should have our goal been? Our goal was, accurate and really fast determination so that people could know if they're eligible for benefits or not. Our throughput was number of decisions, and then we had quality measures on those. We didn't have good throughput measures. All of our data was around managing this freaking call center with thousands of other reams of data that didn't tell me, at least, very much on the two things. What was our throughput and how well were we doing? We had a total misalignment from my perspective on what we thought the goal should have been, even though that wasn't even clearly articulated, and then how we were running the business. Now, there was awesome people. This isn't anything about them. As Rami said earlier, tell me how you measure me, I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. When we spend all this time freaking out about the call center, well, that's where people are going to focus their energy and time. Let's update the call center. Let's put more money into the call center. Let's do all this stuff. Well, just as a little side trip, skipping to use thinking tools, data, and analysis, the root cause wasn't that we needed to pick up the phone more, right? The root cause is that we weren't fast enough. If we'd gotten faster in speed and somebody said, hey, I apply for benefits and I'm going to get it in 2 days versus a week, wow, the calls go down. Wait times go down, drop calls become less of an issue. So it's around, by the way, speed is a big deal. I wish we could have a whole segment just on speed. But the point is that we are treating the wrong symptom, and we had a goal, and we had no alignment with our operation. So when we think about that, setting goals and targets, it's have a goal, make sure your operations is aligned with the goal, and make sure your goal units and your data actually translate to operations so you can know if you're actually executing against it or not. So another issue in this area of goal setting and measures, I want to tell you 7 things that I think are problematic with traditional measures that I've seen outside of the stuff we've already talked about. Too many measures, and we've talked a little bit about how too many measures, they can give us false feedback, It can distract us with management time, right? We don't know as managers when to intervene or when not to intervene because we don't know what the real problem is. So we may intervene when we're not supposed to, and we create more problems. We waste people's time. We bug people for reports that aren't useful or helpful. So sometimes our measures just are so overwhelming, and there's so many of them. Managers, leadership doesn't know when to intervene or not. That's why simple measures are just a great thing and concept to strive to. Also, let me ask you this. If you're on the front line and you have too many measures coming up from management, what does that do to the front line, the folks actually doing the work? What do you guys think? It's overwhelming. Yeah, conflicting messages. They don't know what to do. I mean, they're hearing, I've got to do 50 different things. What am I supposed to do? The example I used earlier today, again at Workforce Services, when I came in, there's a program, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, and the program federally had a requirement of participation. Folks, customers on TAN have had to participate 30 hours a week or more in certain approved participation areas so they could continue to get benefits. And we also wanted employment outcomes. Well, the challenge is there's so much focus on participation. The easiest way to get participation sometimes was just to put people in volunteer environments or community, what did we call them? Basically volunteer stuff where we could just put people and they, get their participation. And at the same time, though, we're saying, no, we want you also to make sure they're getting the employment outcomes. We were setting up a total lose-lose scenario for our staff. Now, there's ways to get both. Yeah, that's a conflict that we talk about that we can break if we think clearly about it. That was a breakable conflict, but we hadn't done that for management. And we were sending, our poor folks on the front line, like sending them 2 different sets of messages. So we want less measures. We want them aligned with the goal units. We want to make sure management knows when to intervene or not to intervene. And there's really great work in the body of TOC on helping to simplify that. Red, yellow, green, right? If you set this up right, we don't have time for that, but there's ways to say if something's red, danger, yellow, could be in danger, green, we're good to go. So managers know I've got a problem or not, I need to intervene. Another issue with measures is too many management averages. I've said this before in my life. On average, somebody could die in 6 inches of water. But we're not normally freaked out by 6 inches of water, right? Because we know on the whole that's not really where people drown. What is wrong with averages? On average, I serve 2,000 people a month. Does that really tell you much? It tells you squat. Averages are problematic because you have outliers that can distort what's really happening in your system. I could say my average caseload is 60, but that could mean one day I have 40 and one day I have 80. It distorts reality. What we want to move to is a more realistic view of what's happening in our system. There's a whole approach we have to this about reliability standards, which is not what are you doing on average, but what are you consistently able to do. It's not like, oh, I can make determinations on average in 20 days. No, I can always make my determinations within 15 days. So the customers know what they can rely on. That's challenging. The business climate has to deal with that, with volatility and variation in demand, but there are ways to cope with that. And understanding that in our processes, the deeper you get into the field of TOC. It's great stuff. So we want to avoid averages. We want to avoid a lot of just activity counts. Sometimes in government we get just reams of how much work have we done. And again, as we talked about earlier, just looking at volume counts without understanding the quality of that work or the cost of that work doesn't tell us much. I'll still see it in budget requests. People will come up for budget requests and they'll say, our caseloads have gone up 1,000 per month. I'm just making this up. But we'll see these increases in volume count, which I think is interesting, but I don't know anything about maybe they're fine because they're able to maintain all their quality standards. Or maybe last year they had a 500% increase in their budget, so they're actually worse. I don't know. Volume counts alone are an important piece of information, but they're not sufficient. 2 last things about traditional problems and measurement systems I've seen is compliance focused. And we talked in the earlier group, it's funny, well, I'll ask this group. Can you be totally perfectly compliant with any audit findings, your federal policies and procedures, single state audit, and still be a poor performer? Absolutely. That's what other group, they're like, who was it that said that? Do you feel passionate about that? I feel passionate about that. I mean, are audits important? Yeah, they are. We need to know, and I'll talk about audits later, we need to know that we've got internal controls in place, there's not fraud, waste, and abuse going on in our systems, yada, yada, that's important. But we can be completely compliant and still be totally a poor performer. On the flip hand, you can be a fantastic performer and not be in compliance. Now, we think compliance is a necessary condition, but there are downsides. If audits aren't done, we think in the appropriate way, they can actually sometimes do harm to organizations. So we have compliance, and then, of course, cost. You heard me talk today about understanding our cost proposition and value and cost. I said this in my speech today, looking at federal reports because apparently I had nothing else to do, which is never the case. But really, I could not believe that they had nothing I could see. And I went to multiple federal websites, and I read too many of their strategic plans, which are way too long. And there's nothing there, like no sense of what does it cost to get this outcome. And this is, the United States of America. We should lead out on this stuff. Anyway, so those are problems I see with traditional measures, and we want to make sure we have a clear goal units, they align with operations, and then we set up our measures. We avoid those 7 things I told you. And we could spend, if you guys just want to come over for dinner one night at my house, we can just talk more about this because I love this stuff. So that's the S, set really good goals and targets. Let me say one more thing on that. About targets, when we started our journey at Workforce Services, and this is when I first started getting into TOC, I had been around process improvement stuff and Six Sigma and Lean and all that stuff is great, but there's still something missing. We were not getting the returns I wanted to see. So when we started this, we had the recession, our caseloads were up like 60%, and we just made this ambitious goal. We said we're going to reduce costs, improve quality, and give money back to the general fund, and do it with no layoffs. We just did it through planned attrition. But we had this really clear goal when we first started. We wanted to hit a $9 million cost saving while improving our quality and our throughput. Eventually, we got it to 16 and the 18, and then we got to 30 million. But we had such a clear target of what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to have urgency. Have you ever had a strategic plan and you write it and then we all know it, and it sits on the shelf? There's like a lack of urgency about it. Sometimes having a real clear target about what we need to accomplish in the next 8 weeks, 2 months, 6 months, even if we don't hit it. I don't know if you guys saw, any of you guys see the correctional guys present? Yeah. Yes? I mean, it was awesome. They tried for 25% and they got 18 and 15. Awesome. But they had something that they were going for, and it pulled them out of the white noise that we just get out of normal variation in our systems. So power of targets are great as you're trying to set goals and move urgency within an organization. Okay, so you use thinking tools. I talked earlier about, I'm walking here for a reason. Oh, there's my purse. Is my bag over here? Yeah, it's right there. Okay. So we talked about systems thinking, and you heard Rami talk about that as well on TOC and how we want to understand the constraint. And I loved how we talked about subordinate, using force to subordinate everything to the constraint. I need 4 volunteers. And there's candy involved. I will just call on you randomly. Come on. You know, if you were in 5th grade, you know how kids in 5th grade would be like, pick me, pick me. And then we get adults. My cane's upside down. And then we don't do that. Why don't we do that as we grow up?
Gotta be nice to me.
Oh, it's Mark. Doo-doo-doo. Oh, my gosh. Dude, I still am. He and I are going for an arm wrestle contest, actually. He's scared of me. Yeah, he's scared of me. Not. He used to play football. Who else do we have up here?
I'm Rob. I work for the Department of Corrections.
Okay, you guys are awesome. Love you guys. Oh, I need therapy. I need therapy. Yeah, I do. Okay, and then who else is here?
Mike Sadler with the Department of Technology Services.
Okay, thanks for coming up. See, these guys are coming up. Okay, you're going to stand in a line. They're all men. We're women. We're the women. So we have 4. This is just going to be a for fun exercise. If you've been through this before, just be quiet. Okay. So you're a social service system, okay? Very basic system. You're going to have an intake. You have eligibility. Can they get the service or not? They get assigned to a caseworker who does the casework, and then they transition out, okay? They have a transition. So you can do 5 things a day. How many did I just give you? 3? He's honest. Look at that. None of you else get any right now. He can do 5 a day. take 5 intakes and collect information from a client. You can get all this information, then you have to process and determine if they're eligible or not. You can do 3 a day. And I said this earlier, it's not that you're inadequate or anything like that. It's not that, it's just the work takes a little more time. You can do 3. The casework takes a lot of time. You can only do 2, okay? Mark, he's like Mark, he can do 10. He can turn out 10, all right? So what's the throughput of the system? How much in a day can this system actually produce? See how smart you all are? I love it. This is not always the answer I get. Why? I don't always get this answer. Why is it 2? Your choke point. Yeah, choke point's a great way to say it because of my constraint. You can share the candy now. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. See how easy that was? I was going to make him hand it off, but I just didn't even make him hand it off. Okay, so it's pretty clear cut, right? That's the essence. So why am I using this under use thinking tools and thinking tools? Because when we start anything, when we do our analysis, we want to start from the system's perspective. Now that's an interesting subject. Like, at what point do you have a system? At the state, there's like the state government system, and then there's departmental systems. But we try to get up as high as we can in a way that makes sense, especially with statutory mandates. And so we look at all the processes, activities, and structures that align to meet a common goal. And that's a system. We have a child welfare system. We have a correctional system. We have DTS has a whole application development system. The great work they're doing there. So we have these big systems. And so when we start to do improvements, we want to focus on the whole system and really understand the interdependencies and the big chunks of the system and how they relate to each other. There's different ways to do this. We use something called a strategy map or throughput operating strategy, just a real basic way to start out and say, what does the system at the very high level look like? One thing I love in theory of constraints, they say if you ever get stuck with the problem, go up a level. You're down in the weeds too deep. Sometimes you ever feel like you're in the weeds so deep and you're in circular and you can't get unstuck. When you're that deep and you can't get unstuck, it's probably because you're down too much. You got to pull yourself up a little bit and be able to see the forest through the trees. So same thing when we start mapping out these systems, we start very high level so we can get a big picture of what this looks like, get a sense of what the big parts are and how they should be working with each other. And then when we understand the constraint, we can start going deeper. We can go much deeper and much more granular. But if we start at the granular level, we'll sometimes start making changes in areas where we really shouldn't be. So we want to think through that pretty strategically. So you get the big part of systems thinking. It's important. A couple other things about when you do your use your data and your process tools. I was going to mention this in the earlier segment, and I didn't. My perspective, organizations normally in government are really good. We have normally really good budget and finance people, and we'll have really good policy people, and everyone is just working hard. Operations, knowing becoming an expert in TOC or flow of work or learning how to do this weird thing in TOC. TOC has weird terms like drum buffer rope. It's a whole practice. It's just an interesting term. But become expertise is not. It requires its own kind of skill set. And sometimes we may not have an operations focus in government. So like if you go to the private sector, everybody has like a COO, right? You'd have somebody who's in charge of operations. I know UTA folks will have stuff like that. In government, we don't necessarily have to appoint somebody if we don't have the resources to do that. But we should be building up that expertise in-house, that we have people that can understand how to map the flow, how to facilitate the work, how to manage the projects, how to get deeper into all of these tools that are out there. Because without that expertise, we just kind of keep doing what we're doing, and we miss really great opportunities. I don't think these should be rocket science, and I think we should get it to the point where, look, if I can do it, anyone can do it, is my point. It's to make it so that anyone can pick this stuff up and we can roll it out across our agencies. But it does take some exact specific hiring or training or appointing somebody or appointing a group of people or assuming that the managers in every division is going to learn it. We've got to start building out that expertise. So that's another part of use thinking tools, that we've got that expertise in-house that we can build out and rely on. Okay, systems thinking, we've got it. So we understand where our gaps are once we use our thinking tools, and then we get into build strategy. Fewer strategies are better. There may be a lot of tactics. We call them strategies and tactics. You may have a few tactics under each strategy. But we don't want to launch like a billion strategies at once. It can be overwhelming and create bad multitasking. One thing that's really true in TOC, were any of you guys in the Mike Hanna DTS presentation earlier when they talk about staggering projects? One of the rules, and it's not just a TOC rule, it's generally true all the time. We sometimes think, if I start everything now, everything will get done sooner. We kind of believe that, right? If I have 5 projects, and if I begin all my 5 projects today, all of them will get done sooner, and we want to feel like we're doing a good job and being responsive. So we start them all at once. But imagine if I were at home at my house and I was going to, mow my backyard, paint a room, and make cookies, which I'm saying I hate cooking, so that would really never happen, me making cookies. But if that were to happen hypothetically, I'm not going to start baking cookies, stop, walk over, mow part of my lawn, stop, go back into my house, paint a little bit, and then stop and start making cookies again. We just wouldn't do that. But we do it with our IT projects. We do it with our strategy implementation and execution of stuff. And I still challenge with this. This is about management time and attention. But when we have strategies we're going to implement or introduce into our systems, we want to make sure they are fewer than more. And we want to make sure that if we're not overwhelming the system by asking them to do too much. We look at something in TOC called WIP, work in progress. We don't want too much of that in our system. It forces bad multitasking and actually makes things take longer. So we want fewer strategies, and we want clear business cases for the strategy. We want a strategy owner. If I'm going to launch a strategy to, increase speed within a certain group, and I know what that's going to look like, who's going to manage that, right? Sometimes we just say a strategy. We got to have somebody who's responsible and accountable for implementing the overall strategy as well as all the tactics, who's essentially the project manager for that strategy. Now, this isn't doctrine. This is just from my own experience, what tends to work and what doesn't work. But if somebody's not assigned to it, it can kind of flounder. And there's a clear business case for the strategy with early feedback loops so that we know if the strategy we're introducing and the tactics is giving us back what we hope to get. We actually call that lever control. Remember, a lever is for a little effort, you can move something big. We want our strategies to be big levers, and we want early feedback to know if that strategy is helping or not. And so you can have good business cases that set up what you think is going to happen, what kind of data you think you're going to pay attention to know if it's impacting your overall goal units. Okay, so those are just some good ideas on strategies. All right, so we set up our goals. We have our good data. We avoid the bad data. We do good systems thinking. We've started to build expertise. We know our gaps. We have our strategies. We have our strategies owners, yada, yada. Then we can talk a little bit about create your organization. We have 3 things here. We have audit, finance, and just your organization structure. I'm not going to talk too much about finance, although we could have a whole class just on throughput accounting. I think we have the way that budgets are currently built in government, I think, are problematic. But that's a conversation much broader than just me. So we will talk about a little bit about audit and then just creating our organization. As I said earlier, sometimes the easiest and first thing we do can be just to move things around on a page, organization charts, and there's a time and place for that. But we want it to make sure the organization, whatever we do, supports the strategy and the flow of the operation, right? Everything should subordinate to the operations and its flow. Because if we start creating like too many checkpoints in our management structure, like really heavy management structures where we're having like 5,000 sign-offs, it's going to slow the flow through the system and create problems. Now, sometimes we do that because we think we have to quality control everything. But if you actually fix your system so you get quality at source, you need less back-end sign-offs because you know up front you're solving the problem up front. And that's part of doing your data, your analysis up front. So we want to make sure your organizations are not negatively impacting the flow of work that's come up through your operations. Same to do with audits. Again, audits are important, and they are there to make sure we're doing what we said we'd be doing, and we're doing it ethically. The challenge with some audits that I've seen is if there isn't a good connection between the business and the audits, and auditors don't understand the flow of work and what's happening on the operational side, there can be, well, what can happen? You guys tell me. Yeah, 10 minutes. 15, thank you. What can happen? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. They can end up measuring or paying attention to or making recommendations, especially if you're looking at performance audits. You can actually get task generators, and they just generate tasks that may give you a 2% improvement versus a 30% improvement. And normally if there's a good relationship with the auditor and the business, the auditors are, I'm talking internal audit, are part of these conversations and sees the big picture, they can be really helpful in aligning and supporting that. If they're not, it can just be a big task generating machine, which is not helpful really for anyone. It's just frustrating. So that's just a caution in the world of audits. Just for time, let me go to the last three parts. So we're going to go into create your organization, and then let's talk about employee engagement and customer engagement. These are iterative things, and I want to tell you some lessons learned I've had in this. Understanding, I'm not going to have as much time to talk about the voice of the customer. I'm going to spend the time on the employee side. Our employees, frontline workers, are just all of you here from every level of government just has amazing perspective and critical paradigm on what's working and what's not working. And we need continual feedback from that. So I'm going to tell you what I've done in the past that did not work, and that what I learned did work, and you guys can take it or leave it. So when I first came into workforce services, and I had run another agency back in Maryland, but DWS was bigger, and I wanted to make sure I was listening to staff and hearing the issues. So when I first started the job, I went on a bunch of listening posts. I met with all of our offices, and it was an open forum where employees could talk about their issues and what was going on, and we just took copious notes. Well, as you can imagine, when you go out to the front line like that, you're going to get really lots of ideas, a lot of stuff coming in. The problem I had is that when you go out and just do that, it kind of sets up expectations like, yeah, we're going to deal with all this, and you can't, number one. But number two, because we hadn't done our own work as management saying, here's what good looks like, here's what the big flow of work looks like, and here's how the big parts, here's how they do interact with each other, and here's how they should ideally interact from each other. We didn't give anyone a framework. So when we go say, here's just give us any idea, we're sometimes getting fantastic ideas, and other ways we're getting ideas that may have actually not helped the overall throughput of the system. So let me give you an example. We went out, and when I went out, we heard a lot of complaints about one of our steps in our process. It was imaging. And man, and sometimes you go to these groups too, right? There's always some people who are quiet and some people who are more dominant. We heard a lot from people saying we hate imaging, it's a problem. And so where do you think my management time and attention went? Went to imaging. Let's go figure out let's fix imaging. So we're going to spend all this time in imaging, and we actually had an imaging consultant come out to look at our imaging process, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, as I started to kind of open my eyes a little bit about system syncing, I started to understand when we looked at the data that our biggest constraint was not imaging. It was in the determinations. Now, imaging helps that because they wanted full kit, everything they needed to do the job. But there's a lot of other issues going on in our biggest constraint. And I had dropped the ball by letting just untempered or unfiltered ideas come and kind of drive our management time and attention. Did it mean that wasn't important? Sure it was. I mean, if it's impacting employees, we've got to address it. But it wasn't the most important thing. Once we could start getting more throughput through our constraint, then we can come back and deal with imaging, or at least prioritize the things in imaging that are having the most negative impact on our constraint, which were those folks making the determinations. So I've had to learn a lot of this through hard knocks and lessons learned. So staff engagement is so critical. My lesson, though, through all of that is give folks a bit of a framework so they have, even on one page, what does good look like? How do the pieces work together? What should happen? What should it look like before the constraint and after the constraint? How do we subordinate all the pieces? Everyone's important, but what does the flow look like? So that folks can give feedback within that. And second, I would ask folks always, and I've learned this, what can you do today? Otherwise, sometimes we get a lot of ideas about, well, I need this website change, and we just generate a lot of change orders in our IT systems or changes that are going to take like a year or 6 months. We want urgency around some of this stuff. And so sometimes, we should always ask the question from ourselves as well as our employees as we're looking at making changes. What can I do today is one bucket. Another bucket's what's going to take some more time. Still super viable, important things that we need to take action on, but what can we do today is a real important question that we should be asking our frontline employees as well as ourselves, because there could be just small policy changes. There could be small workflow changes. You looked at corrections and some of the things they made that were just changes in their scheduling, which was awesome, that didn't require this huge IT fix. So those are really important questions to ask with employees. Okay, so if we do the engagement piece and we've created structures so we have ongoing feedback from employees as well as our customers so that we're fine-tuning our approach and seeing where our gaps are, we want to get into the final two pieces, which is synchronize our policies and our projects and then stay focused. We all know what stay focused is, management time and attention. I'm not going to spend much time on that today since you've heard about it from Rami. It's an essential part, and it's hard and creates a lot of discipline, and it's more about saying no, what I won't do, than it is saying what I will do. So I want to spend my time in synchronizing our projects. IT can be super important and just make a lot of business value, but we think it should be one of the last things we consider for a couple of reasons. One, it costs money, and two, we want it to actually automate processes that are working, not processes that aren't working, right? So if we just take an inefficient business process and automate it, we haven't really helped. So we want to make sure we've cleared out all of our stuff, done all of our work, the 5 focusing steps, understanding our constraint. Once we get the flow of work as good as we can, then we can start talking about automation. We've actually been in some systems, I won't name names, but a number of them were actually, after automation, they were worse off in timeliness and in cost. So automation should be used, and it should be used wisely. So that's the first caution. The second thing is on the business side, we can do a lot to become maybe more disciplined and structured around what we're expecting from the IT side. So we get lots of ideas on the business about automation. Would you agree? Like, let's build this app, and let's do this website, and let's get this data warehouse, and let's connect these 2 data sets, and let's, we are good at creating ideas in the business side. We just generate lots of ideas, and then we just throw them to IT over a fence and say, have fun with that, right? Good luck. Do we ever do that? Never. We never do that. We've talked a lot about bad multitasking today, not a lot, but some, and there's actual data around this. One piece of data for this group that's interesting, they did a study over at Microsoft. It was an outside group. Yeah, thanks. Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. Oh, it's my husband. Thank you. And they found, 5 minutes, they found that bad multitasking, developers who were bad multitasking, lost 11 hours of development time a week from task switching, going back from one project to the next, right? It really reduces our effectiveness when we're switching from one task. It is such a simple solution. Nobody believes it, so we never implement it because it seems too simple. It is empirically proven when we reduce bad multitasking, we get more throughput and better quality. Mark's team talked about that today at DTS. They're minimizing bad multitasking. Their development team, they're getting double throughput. So on the business side, what structures do we have in place as gatekeepers to prioritize our work, only prioritizing the work that aligns with our business flow that we've understood with our doing our data and our thinking tools analysis. We only automate those things that really align with the constraint, and all those things we've talked about. We have strong business cases for them. We understand how they're going to impact our operating expense as compared to our quality and our throughput. And we prioritize, and we only let a few things through at a time so that our IT side can work on those and be clear on what they're working on. We're not bad multitasking them, and I promise you, if we can stagger our work, they'll get more done. My experience is that the IT side really wants to do a good job where we sometimes are deficient, not always, but in some cases deficient on the business side, creating the right structures so that we can manage the work on IT. Essentially, IT is a business. It subordinates to business. Business should drive IT. IT is simply about providing business value. So what structures and expertise do we have to manage the projects, get the right business cases set up so that we know how to manage the work? When we started Workforce Services, we were hemorrhaging development hours. There was tons of just change requests, over 100 hours or less, so we're eating up all of our development resources. We just went in and we started with listing all the projects and we cut them in half. We said half of these are on freeze. Doesn't that sound scary? Because we want to do it all at once because we believe if we start everything today, it will get done sooner. It's not true. We have to stagger our work and it will get done quicker, and it's saying no and prioritizing. So I'm pretty passionate about this on the IT stuff because it has so much potential, but we've got to get the right structures in place. Okay, so overall for success, and then the stay focused thing, you've heard enough about it today, management, time, and attention. And that's if you're a supervisor, a frontline employee, all of us need to stay focused on the goal and organize our work accordingly. That's a lot, huh? Could we do 4 days on this? Do you guys want to just stay for a few more days so we can go into much more detail? But these are the basics, like, right? We've got to get these right. Know our goal, good analysis, have solid grasp of our operations and the gaps, create few lever points, big leverage points through strategy to implement, have urgency and accountability in that structure. Think about having solid infrastructure in our organizations to do that. Engage our employees the right way in a way that responds to their needs and concerns but supports the whole organization. And that we synchronize all of our policies and projects and we have good focus. We can do those things, easy breezy, right? We're well on our way to making a big difference. So do you guys have any questions? Like my favorite food, you've heard my favorite drink, Coke. I'm happy to share my favorite food. Popcorn, by the way, if you're interested in that. Do you have any questions at all? Yeah.
Can I ask one?
Yes, you can.
How have you sorted out how much of your savings go back to general fund and how much stay in the department to improve value for their client?
Who is this?
Jerry from UTA.
It's a great question. We have made a rule of internally, like, right, we're not the legislature, so I can't dictate this to them. But from our perspective, if agencies have freed up money, in some cases they really have, and they can have, we actually have a template now for a business case. So with this next session, when there's building block requests, it's all tied to their Q2 over OE. So if they've reduced their OE and either maintained their Q and their T through the reduction or improved it, and they have a business case that will show how they're going to redivert those resources to continue to prove Q and T, they'll support it. Or if they don't need all of it, we'll take all of it. I would love to get, I want to reward agencies, right? I want to reward them if they're doing a good job. Now, if they don't have a good business case and another entity needs it, we'll take it and redivert it because we see it as one big system. There's a whole concept in TOC around aggregation and the value of aggregation. It's a whole different topic to talk about. But it really depends on how strong their business case is. Can they say, I saved $1 million, I need 500,000 of it, and this is how it's going to impact my quality and throughput? I'll look at that. The issue with government is it's a cost reduction issue for sure, where we can, but a lot of it is about slowing the growth curve of government. The population in Utah especially is naturally going to increase. So can we do more and better quality for the same resources? So if there's a good business case of how that's going to happen, then I'm will entertain those resources staying where they are. I'm not here to swipe money. I want agencies to have high performance. The other piece of this is just an analogy we use. If I'm a car manufacturer and I produce 100 cars, but only 60 meet quality standards that I can sell to market, my first opportunity for efficiency, quote unquote, is getting better quality. Because if I can now go from 60 cars being ready to sell to market and I can get to 100, with the same resources, I have now 40 more units that are effective. If I'm serving kids and only 60% of my kids are meeting my standards in terms of them being safe, and I can use those same resources and now get it to 80, man, I'll keep those resources in there, man. That's a great investment. So it's all around the business case. Long-winded explanation. So, any other questions? Okay, you guys, thanks so much. We appreciate all you do, and go out and enjoy. Thank you.